This is a story about the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we live out in the world, and the space between those two. It's about how we love, how we lose, and how we recover, or not, through the stories we make up in our heads. I'm Robin Rice, and this is also my story. Chapter 31, Alchemy and Aya. Risk is defined, quite simply, as the possibility of something bad happening. An exposure to danger, a threat. Sounds doomed from the start, doesn't it? Sure, bad things can and do happen. Very bad things, worse things, the worst of all things, whatever that might be for us. Why would anyone risk then? Why would anyone leave the house? Far more perilous. Why would a Tibetan teenager leave his home country to cross the Himalayan mountains to find safety and a better life as an exile in India, be he a peasant boy or the Dalai Lama? The answer is, it depends. Usually on a lot of things. More to our purposes here, it depends on a lot of stories. Think of risk then as a story lens, a way to see your life, yourself, your world. Anais Nin wrote, "And the day came when the risk to remain tight in the bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom." Wow, there's a story for you. Risk as pain? We might not know the details for Nin, but I'm guessing most of us know the feeling. If the opposite of risk is certainty, I'm not saying it is, but there isn't a direct opposite, it's not a fair exchange. First, because certainty doesn't imply good things happening, just stable things. And second, because certainty doesn't exist in life, which means everything is always a risk. On some level, we know this to be true, but still. There's chosen risk and forced risk. Chosen risk is premeditated, calculated, and hopefully well considered, maybe even wise. Certainly not stupid. No one would opt for open-heart surgery with a perfectly good heart. Forced risk is far more scary. We start out with unstable footing and go from there. A surgery with a 50-50 chance of loss of life immediately versus a 95% loss of life in 6 months. Now, that's a risk to consider. It's easy to risk $1 for a lottery ticket, despite the odds being ridiculous. Maybe not so easy to risk a hike up Mount Everest, bungee jump some 850 feet in China, or slide down a double black diamond slope. Even when the risk is mitigated through physical agility and preparation, you have to give those risk takers credit. As I write, the last of the swimmers of the Portuguese Ironman are in front of me, the bikers behind me. Whoever comes in dead last still risked more than I did on this hazy October Saturday, with a laptop on the back porch. Then again, they are not likely to be hanging all their personal laundry on the clothesline of the World Wide Web, as I have through this book, so maybe in a way we're even. It gets tricky, doesn't it? What's worth the risk and what's not? What holds us captive with fear and what feels more like an, okay, no biggie. And what about the risk that paralyzes? That's a risk with consequences, too. And phantom risks. Truth is, we can waste our lives in fear of risks we will never take. The lens of risk is one of accounting, a tallying of potential gains and losses, pro and con evaluations, both objective and subjective, all of which say something about who we are, how we live our lives, and what we think about what we have, what we can afford to lose, and what we hope to gain. All stories true, but wow, do those stories shape our lives. Some of this risk-taking is conscious, but a whole lot of it is not. We don't assess the risk of getting in the car every time we do. If we looked closely at those odds, we might never go anywhere. Instead, we choose to ignore the facts and figures of car accidents being more likely to happen in a small radius of our home. We play little tricks with ourselves about things that will never happen to us. Over time, though, we do become the type of person who is big on risk, a risk taker, or risk averse, a fuddy-duddy afraid of her own shadow. It becomes part of our identity. So, are you a gambling man? A betting woman? What would your friends say? Your children, your parents, your siblings, your boss? If we want to be more conscious, we can look at the risks we are accepting and rejecting in our lives right now, today. Through the lens of risk, we can discover what we really believe about what we have and what we expect to have or lose in the future. Also, what we are capable of and how much risk is too much, now or ever. Whenever I work with someone one-on-one, especially with the kinds of leaders I work with today, all of whom have a lot more to risk than I do, I'm always listening for the level of risk they can handle in our journey together. How much room do I have to risk moving them from where they are to where they want to be? What kind of risks are okay, and what kinds are not? Spiritual risk, emotional risk, financial risk, relational risk, reputational risk, it's all in there. As mentor and guide, I know there is absolutely no point in taking someone too far too soon. It will backfire. Every time. Still, there is story gold here. Because to risk requires that we look at the space between the way things are and the way they could be, and how we want to stand in that space. Also, what we find dangerous and what we are willing to, risk anyway. If the opposite of risk were safety and not certainty, how safe is too safe? When does too safe become its own risk? We can also look at where risks become irrational and why. That usually takes some digging into the still tender wounds from previous ill-fated risks. But again, that's story gold. Risk is often about an attempt at control, another story, which in reality we rarely have. It assumes we know all potentials, which we never do. Cautious as you were about not driving your car unless absolutely necessary, given the risks I've already mentioned, you could still get run over by the bus you're trying to catch. But do you factor that into your analysis? No, it's too much. You can't control everything, you might say, but your everything and someone else's will be different. Risk also allows us to consider how much tolerance we have to look at the big risk that is life itself. Who considers that every single person they love will die, unless they die first? It's a sure bet. But how closely will we dare look at it? How closely can we? I mean, who wouldn't rather be unconscious about that? Also in our unconsciousness, our inner risk evaluator chugs along assuming nothing else will change. That the risk stands alone with no other variables. Nothing extraneous will occur, which, let's face it, isn't reality. The reality, the real reality, is that even though everything risks what is already always at risk. Things change. So, given all this, why look through the risk lens in the first place? Why not just keep going our merry little unconscious way? I tend to go for the jugular on this one because I've found that, at the core, risk is really about whether or not we trust life, and our life in particular. It's a big, ongoing question for each of us, and the lens of risk helps us contemplate it. For me, my greatest risk, and I know I'm a bit weird here, is not taking every shot I have at understanding the universe. In a way, it can feel greedy. My awakening experience was more than most will get by a huge margin. Am I pushing some kind of invisible limit? Is there an existential cliff to fall off of? Back then, it felt especially risky because I was already an outsider to most of our social culture. To explore more was to risk further isolation. I was always acutely aware of that. But then Scotty had arrived as my life partner, my grounding masculine, earth to my sky. To me, he mitigated the risk, agreeing to hold the kite strings as I flew, up, but not too far away. I was finally free to explore wide and far the winds of consciousness. It was the perfect safety net for deep contemplation and far-reaching existential exploration. There was nothing stopping me now. Enter the labyrinth. My shamanic work was humming along, and now included teaching. New clients and their healing stories showed up every day, repeatedly and reliably. It was deeply soul-satisfying to be of profound help, but for myself, something was still lacking. Something the shamanic alone did not reach far enough into. I wanted to know how it worked, it being everything, especially consciousness, why it worked and by what mechanism, and how was it that so many of my fellow humans were completely missing out on this greater reality I was privy to. Why? What was the holdup? Why were we collectively holding out if that was the case? I was sure it had something to do with the brain, our brain's limitations. A block, maybe? I was studying everything I could find, book after book, with more and more access to obscure and ancient teachings, finding me as much as I found them. Not having a scientific mind, a lot of the biology, chemistry, and physics flew right past me. This was disappointing because intuitively I felt this would be where the deeper explanations could come from. Angels were great, amazing, really. But if they had no physical reality, what kind of reality did they exist in? Only in my head? And why did we have virtually no sanctioned scientific explanation of this thing called consciousness? Was no one else curious? We were all swimming in consciousness, yet it seemed taboo to actually talk about it, even think about it. Woo-woo, unless you added a god, and then it was socially okay. I wasn't okay with that, as you might expect. Philosophy was intriguing, but the vast majority of it didn't speak to the awakening experience that I had, let alone explore its profundity. The whole school of thought felt old, outdated, strictly five senses human-related. A hallucination, Salome would say, pointing me toward non-consensus reality. Maybe I wasn't finding the right philosophers. Varying approaches such as Buddhism, Taoism, and others did hold clues, but none drew me significantly enough to follow a singular path. Alchemy, though most found it much more fabled than fact, kept striking a bell. In specific, the drawings of alchemy as found in various old texts, and some modern ones, seemed to light something up in me. There is a 19th century wood engraving called The Pilgrim that shows a spiritual seeker putting his head through the furthest dark layer of ordinary reality, to a world behind it, beyond it, above it. That world I understood. I had seen it. I had visited, however briefly. So, was alchemy my path beyond or alongside shamanism? Would it be enough? The shaman knows that the right way forward can and should be confirmed by either a symbolic outside event or a nighttime dream. Or a medicine journey, if you were fortunate to have access and a safe place for exploration. In my case, I would begin by exploring psilocybin. I've always been a little astonished at how vehemently many people oppose the idea of a mind-expanding psychedelic experience. I assume they must believe the very effective and affecting marketing campaign on the war against drugs. "This is your brain on drugs," the voice warned as we watched an egg fry. They were scared straight. I had a small leg up, though, through my father, who had offered me mushrooms for an after-lunch snack that would take effect right before my 9th grade 5th-hour English class. Internally, I laughed and laughed and laughed, barely holding it in. Externally, no one seemed to notice. I only did it a few times, not liking to be out of control. Still, the memory was a good one. So when the opportunity to journey with shrooms came along on a luxuriously empty Saturday afternoon, I was more than game. I wasn't in it to have fun. I expected it would be. No, I was in it for the greater exploration of reality. The taste was problematic, especially with a dose on the heavy side, like eating the bark of a tree. Once ingested, the finely chopped mushroom sat uncomfortably in my empty stomach. But soon enough, my fingers started to sprout, to grow long, and to complain. Apparently, I'd been treating each finger like all of the others, while they had specific roles, tasks, and accomplishments. How dare I consider them all the same? I apologized profusely, the idea making total sense as I stared at each one with fascination. So, what else had I been missing? My fellow traveler stood in the kitchen with a large, sharp knife in one hand, poised to meet a mango held in the other. For what seemed at least an hour, there was no movement, just staring, knife and mango. I worried about the slip of a hand, a knife slicing a finger instead of the fruit. Apparently, it was as profound an experience as it was long. I decided to trust my companion and get on with finding my own profundity. My brain traveled through what seemed an endless array of past lovers. What the hell was the draw with sex anyway? I grew angry at some of them, disgusted with others, bored with yet others, and some, wow, wasn't that wonderful? The wood paneling came alive, speaking shit to me, a victim of manslaughter. I tuned it out, not today. A million things came and went, but at one point I looked up to the ceiling and there he was. God. His face was so clear, bearded with a mustache and long hair surrounding a squarish face. The eyes, the nose, the cheekbone, the lips, all so clear to me. His eyes twinkled like Santa Claus, and he brought one finger to his lips. Don't tell anyone. No one to tell, I thought, and no one to believe me. I got up to get one of the pins Terry used to mark the places she'd been on a huge wall map. I put an orange pin in my God's ceiling spot, so I would be able to find him later. So far as I know, that tiny orange pin still lives in the ceiling to this day. At least it was there the last time I was. Though I can tell you, God is definitely harder to find when sober. What I did not know, and would not know for another few months, was that the God I had seen was exactly the same man as pictured as Hermes in Alchemy. In specific, in an ancient portrait of him as shown in Les Offres des Philosophies in Paris of 1659. The portrait is at the center of the 7 steps of transformation in alchemy. I had my signal, my sign, and my path. So my teacher, my guide, was Hermes? A god, but not the god. An Olympian deity, the thrice greatest, of whom Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher credited with many mathematical and scientific discoveries, was said to be a direct descendant. The Pythagorean theorem, the 5 regular solids, the theory of proportions, the sphericity of the earth, and more in astronomy, geometry, and the theory of music. I was to learn from the one Pythagoras learned from? Well, there was my science, philosophy, and more, but still, Hermes, author of the Emerald Tablet, which supposedly contained the sum of all knowledge, as discovered by Belinus in ancient Greece. Then again, why not? Hermes was the protector of human heralds, which is sort of what I am in this very book. Also of travelers, thieves, merchants, and, get this, orators, also like me here. The one who moves quickly and freely between the worlds of the mortals and the divine, as I did in that flash of a moment in 1997, but even as a kid, seeing dead people. Hermes himself appeared in Terry's ceiling, to me, on a mushroom journey. If you believe that, I've got some land in Idaho to sell you. Still, it was all I had to go on. I dug deeper. Yes, Hermes, who plays the role of the psychopomp, or soul guide, in other words, the shaman's role, and is a conductor of souls into the afterlife. Hermes, the emissary and messenger of the gods. The divine trickster, too. Was that why he raised his finger to his lips, telling me not to tell? Well, I just now realize I guess I've done it, haven't I? Telling each and every one of you listening. So be it. I'm not sure that kind of not telling was what he was trying to say anyway. Whatever it was and whatever it meant, it was a greater clue, and greater clues were few and far between. If that was not enough, my heart raced whenever I got near discovering an alchemical insight. If nothing else, because they fit. They made sense. They were honest, true, and practical. Alchemy, step 1, calcination, or fire. Things burn down. Yeah, I knew that. Step 2, disillusion, or flood. All the emotions. The fire's sooty soot gets soggy. Things further dissolve. It's a mess. Step 3, separation. We are sorting. We'll salvage this, tossing the rest, everything that is too far gone. We are making sense of what's worthy and not, deciding, choosing, then moving on. Most folks live step 1 through 3 on repeat, circling many of the same damn things over and over and over. Some call it the onion peel, each layer leading to the same, only condensed. Hopefully, we learn something more each go-round. The first 3 steps all occur in the human, earthly realm. Step 4, though, offers a leap, a spark, conjunction. Take what's left of us in our life, the stuff that is still good and workable, and combine it. Step 5, ferment it. Grapes to wine, base to divine. This is where the lead of gold in alchemical folklore comes from. It's not just the material reality, though. In fact, it can only be accomplished through the soul. It goes through the process of putrefaction first, which is as bad as it sounds. Your life becomes compost, my friend. Hot dung. Step 6, distill it. More like distill the hell out of it. Make it potent. Remove all impurities. Make it more potent. Keep only the very best of the essence. Make it more potent still. Do it again and again and again. They say this takes decades, lifetimes even. So I would learn the hard way. Finally, step 7, coagulation. The philosopher's stone, which appears first only in hypnagogic dream states, then becomes a solidified light. A usable, healing light that can transform anything material or non-material. Anything. If alchemy wasn't the highest path on earth, well, it was high enough for me. Far, far easier said than done, though. Hermes was in Terry's ceiling, pinned like a place on a map. But the map for this journey was internal. I was all about it anyway, all over it. And I had some experience already. Shamanism had lifted me to the upper worlds, allowed me to travel backwards and forward in time in the middle worlds, and let me visit the archetypal lower worlds. Now, alchemy offered a more direct access to my axis mundi, a pole from the very bottom of hell to the very top of heaven that is found within every human. I thought about my rapid cycling bipolar disorder and how I'd unwillingly been running those lines for years. Now I would learn to do it consciously. But how to find this axis mundi in my very real and ordinary life, in my own body? If it was easy to find, we all would have. Most meditations seem designed to keep this very pole, and every other thought, insignificant and irrelevant. Thoughts were to be witnessed and left alone, returning again and again to the breath. But I didn't want to leave it alone. I wanted to play with it and maybe come to understand it. That's when the great mother of a teacher, motherfucker of a teacher, some would say, came into my life. Ayahuasca, the vine of the little death. With Aya, I could die enough to travel the internal sacred pole of connection between the earthly and heavenly realms. Or so I'd been promised. For this, I would travel to the jungle. In a land of oversized spiders in every corner, I was surprisingly comfortable. In the land of rattlesnakes along footpaths, I was a little less so. Especially when one visited the cabin I was meant to be sleeping in the very night of my first Aya journey. It was as if the jungle was saying, "Don't get cocky here, I'm still in charge." I had been given sufficient instruction and warned that I might need a puke bucket at a moment's notice. Me being the sort that got sick on a merry-go-round, I kept it close. I would have preferred silence, but the singing and the whacking of sacred dried plants were part of the ceremony, so I kept my opinions to myself. I'd been warned Aya might not be good for those with psychiatric conditions such as bipolar disorder, so that risk was definitely on my mind. What was I going to set off inside of myself? Was it something I could never recover from? I'd even heard of someone's heart stopping mid-journey and having to be carted out of the jungle in a body bag. You think about these things when you're allowing yourself to leave all rational capacity for many hours. A half hour in, I was swaying and vomiting. An hour in, and I knew this was my drug, my plant concoction, my sacred medicine. First, it was the colors. Like in my awakening, far more real than we might imagine. They formed themselves into shapes that swirled, undulated, and carried me here first, then there. Paisley-style formations with eyes like demons rose and fell in my awareness. I went to dark, scary places. Hell realms? Maybe. But then, this is in me, I thought. Ah, so hell is in me, not someplace you go if you're bad. Okay. I didn't resist the hell realms as instructed, also marveling that I could remember any instruction at all. Robin was still present. I could feel her. She just wasn't front and center. Wasn't important. I searched for that other aspect of me. Oh, she's the one commenting on this ride. Nice. I had to think. I wanted to think. Others might have let the music take them to ride the currents, but I determined to ask questions, to better understand all of it. Whatever part of me was seeking understanding was definitely not on the back burner. Before me, the most glorious staircase appeared. Rich, dark brown wood, intricately carved, beautifully crafted, thousands of feet high, with stairs going in every direction, leading to door upon door. A stunning maze. I asked where this staircase was to be found. In your mind, I heard. This is your mind. Wow, it's beautiful. I marveled for some time, exploring the intricate carvings, then the magnificent whole. At some point, I asked, "If this is my mind, can I ask questions?" "You should," I heard. "It is your birthright to ask anything." I smiled at that, not having been aware that I had always felt a little guilty for being that kid with all the questions. I let that go and found great relief. "There are parts of me that are different from other parts," I began. I felt the yes reply more than I heard it. "Can I see my intuition?" Above a large, long corridor, high up and just beyond a stunning railing, a slim woman in business shoes, a pin skirt, and fitted blouse appeared. Her hair was in a tight bun and her face thin. A librarian type, I thought. This is my intuition? I was expecting a gauzy, long dress type. "You're my intuition?" I asked. "Yes," she replied flatly. No nonsense, that one. "Well, how are we doing?" "Great. I tell you what to do and you listen." Huh. Okay. Not what I expected, but good to know. "Anything you want me to know?" "I'll tell you when I do," she replied, as if that should have been obvious. "Okay, I'd like to see my relationship guru, I said next, having no idea why or why I would consider this aspect of me a guru. Though, if I was learning anything in this life, it was probably relationships. This one looked like a guru, with a white cotton sarong. He was male, with a wrapped head. "How are we doing?" I asked. He bobbed his head back and forth as if to say, so-so. I didn't want to hear more, so I traveled on to tour many other characters within me, each with their own role, function, and task. I toured my organs, heart, lungs, then explored my fingers again. They didn't grow this time. I asked about my rapid cycling bipolar disorder, where it was located and how it had been healed. To my surprise, they said it didn't heal. I was shown something like a thick, yellow-brown, waxy lung that had collapsed and was still inside of me. But I thought I was better. Another part of you took up the regulation of your moods. Be careful not to overtax it. I wasn't sure what that meant, but it spooked me, to have that ugly thing still inside of me. The feeling of being spooked took me down, or rather into a downward feeling. Scary, sticky, gross images began to appear. Ah, so this is what happens when you're afraid. Reasons to be afraid appear. Oh, wait, fear is a realm. I needed to remember that. I was descending quickly, too quickly. I vomited again. The afraid feeling was palpable, easy to recognize. Wait, let me try happiness. Instantly, I was climbing. Even while puking again, I somehow registered back there on the mat on the floor in the jungle. But who cares? Happiness is lovely, isn't it? It's not joy, that's higher up. And so I lifted. Joy all the way up here. Beautiful, but not manic. I didn't want to feel manic, didn't want to risk the bipolar. And with that fear, I slid down again. But in that sliding, I got it. Wait. I'm traveling the axis mundi. I found it. For a flash, less than a flash, I saw Hermes smiling, his finger to his lips like a joke, his eyes still dancing. Hermes, thanks for coming. I traveled up through layers and levels of being, of reality, of life and non-life realms. I looked down. There she was, Robin. Such a nice girl, I thought, and maybe said. And then I was sad, though I didn't travel down to be sad. Curiously, this was a beautiful sadness, like the sadness that wasn't sad when I awakened. This was love-born sadness, I somehow knew. It was because I would only be Robin Rice once, and I loved her so much. I would go on, I, the real me, for sure, and I, the real me, would be others as I had been before. But never again would I be Robin Rice, and that made me sad enough to cry. Robin was a one-time deal, this moment only. Such a nice girl, I repeated to myself, and I felt that permeate me, change me. A surge of love for the one carrying me, the real me, under the cloak of Robin, washed away any self-hatred I'd ever carried. She'd ever carried. I had no way to know it, but I would never again feel anything but love for the girl named Robin Rice, that I was being for this lifetime. I slid up the pole to higher and higher levels of consciousness and found less and less content, then climbed down again while still joyous. It was more of an effort. I wanted to tell my sitter about what I was seeing. I'd get close, about 10 feet above my own head, and then give up. I'll talk about it later. Exploring the highs and lows, it was clear that this was not the same high and low I had experienced in my bipolar disorder. I asked to understand. That was based on chemistry, too much and too little of what I needed to be stable from a body perspective. Gas in the tank and a foot on the pedal meant too much or too high. Empty the gas tank or put the foot on the brake, and everything would halt, with my mood plummeting. In other words, my bipolar was about the physical machine that I was, not the spiritual being that was far more true. But that chemistry wasn't the axis mundi. On the axis, I traveled levels of consciousness, not mood. However, it became clear, I'm not sure how, perhaps I asked, that there was a correlating physical energy, a vibration of sorts that was accompanying the journey. So my mood could be affected, but it was an after effect, not an instigator. I had the feeling I was on to something. Then a knowing that it was so, even if I didn't completely understand it. Suddenly, I remembered Tim. Oh, wow, it was the Axis Mundi we traveled when we touched the heavens through sex. Without warning, just like in my awakening, which meant sex was worth exploring even further, and maybe why I'd been so into it from such an early age. This Axis Mundi excited me. More than shamanism, spirit guides, past lives, channeling, Billy Graham's angels, or anything else. Unless they were all a part of it? Were they? Passing scenery maybe at different layers and levels? Yes, that felt true. Wow, so everything is all part of the one thing, just like they said. When I came out of the journey, the shaman that had been singing and whacking me with leaves said, "You are a tongue for the world. You had balls of light around you, so I brought some for my family." I wondered if that wasn't stealing, which made me a bit wary of him. But then again, maybe there was enough to go around. A smorgasbord of light balls at my disposal. I liked the idea. Many other things happened on that journey. Most I would fail to remember except vaguely. But none shaped me so much as discovering the Axis Mundi. And that I loved Robin Rice, my sweet self. I sat in profound contemplation for days. It was as if I'd paid $1, scratched a ticket, and won the spiritual lottery. Again. This winning, though, was available to anyone. Anyone willing to risk. Enter your labyrinth at BeWhoYouAre.com.